Welcome to Career Cravings with your hosts, Dev Rumsharan and Megan Reed. If you crave a better and more satisfying career, this show is for you. We're broadcasting live on Bold Radio Station every week. Now, here are your hosts, Dev and Megan.
Of Career Cravings, and I am speaking to you from beautiful Toronto in the end stage of one of the most beautiful summers we've had. And I'm with my co-host,
Megan Reed, and you're listening to Career Cravings live on Bold Radio.
We're going to be speaking to a pretty interesting guest. Every one of our guests is interesting, of course, but this one's particularly interesting. She's a millennial. She is in the field of medicine, and she'll talk about her areas of specialization when she begins to introduce herself. And the title of this particular program is The Career Journey of Internationally Trained Dr. Lara Gizzi. Lara, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your career.
Okay, Dev, Meg, thank you so much for having me on the show. First and foremost, this is an absolute privilege. I'll introduce myself to the world out there. My name's Lara Gizzi. I'm a happy Torontonian, and I have a little bit of a different twist to my journey into medicine. So I was one of those people who always knew what I wanted. I wanted medicine from the get-go. I'm unfortunately had a very ill family since I was a child, and so there were several people that were being taken care of at all times, and I was always the person that wanted to dive in head first. And then through school, science is kind of the area that fit with me as well, so that was a good match. And so when it came to applications for school, to be honest, when it came to applying to Canada, I had made the decision to apply a little bit late in the game. So when I went to go sign up online, you're given an ID code in order to actually apply and use this to log in and sort of submit. I did this late in the game, and it sort of popped up that I was too late to apply for the year that I was gunning for. So my options were to wait a year, to enter a master's program, or to take another route. So I had an advisor through Western Ontario, where I went to university and got my bachelor's in med science. And he was a pathology professor in St. Kitts and Nevis, which is a beautiful little Caribbean island not too far from Puerto Rico, and said, you know what, I teach here. I have a great rapport with the people in the school. I have a lot of faith in them, and give it a shot. Go look it up, research it yourself. So I went to a fair where they were, sort of broadcasting their school. I met some of their recruiters. I met some previous students, and I took a risk. I applied. The interview went well. It felt really good from the get-go. And before I knew it, I was starting there in that actually, I applied in the summer, and within months, I was on my way to St. Kitts. So packed my bag, went to St. Kitts and Nevis, and my class was not your typical med school class. It was literally like each area of the States and Canada had sort of thrown one member out. So I sat beside a 40-year-old Nigerian. I sat beside someone from Buffalo. There was a New Yorker, people from Texas, a few Canadians scattered in there. So just a really diverse class, which made living and learning there that much more fun. Moving to it is a third world country. So moving to a place like that and knowing absolutely no one was a big risk and a big challenge, but sort of being immersed in so many different cultures and with so many different people who have the same vision was really awesome. So that's sort of my journey into St. Kitts. Spent about a year and a half. Sorry, go ahead, Meg.
No, so I was just going to say, it sounds like you are definitely a bit of a risk taker moving into your career, and that it happened a little bit happenstance as to why you actually applied out of the country. But continue with your story.
I'm definitely a risk taker. Say a friend of mine or my family members would agree that I dive into things. I usually am pretty confident in my choices in life, and I dive in because truly at that point to me, the risk was completely worth it. The risk being you don't exactly know. So there's a lot known about Caribbean schools, but some things are positive and some things are negative, and it's certainly hard to ignore some of the negative, but I felt like it was the right thing. I went with my gut on it, and there I went. So I spent about 2 years on the island of St. Kitts, very beautiful island, and definitely a different way of living. You know, I drove a really beat up $500 car that I shared with 2 other friends that got stolen on several occasions. You know, I lived beside a beach in sort of like a little loft type area. You know, you immerse yourself with the locals. You totally adopted the island life, you know. I pretty much ate chicken and mangoes every single day, and we had a beautiful campus, very state-of-the-art, beautiful anatomy labs with new cadavers that came in every semester. So I felt pretty spoiled there, actually. It was a gorgeous campus.
So I think you've hit on some key points that make at least your med school experience a little different from the average Canadian student applying to Canadian schools. From your understanding and your knowledge, I guess, just of how Canadian schools work, can you touch a little bit on why and how your med school journey was so different from that of someone in Canada?
Absolutely. So, you know, a large difference in the very beginning, Canadian schools are very difficult to get into. But once you're in that school, you're very well taken care of. So most of your programs are all very well set up for you. All your clerkships where you sort of get out of the desk and start working as a medical student in the hospital are all set up for you. Again, you're still in one country. Usually you're surrounded by people with a similar upbringing, so that makes it very different. And it's a much more clear-cut path. You're going to be in this country doing this. Then you're going to go to this hospital. You're going to graduate here with these people and go on from there. As a Caribbean medical student, they show you the door, but it's honestly like being on a survivor island. It is very hard to get through the next phases. So, you know, to put it into perspective, I'd say of the people that I started with, I'd say I had a class of 75. When it came time to graduate, I graduated with maybe 20 of those people.
Wow.
So it's definitely a difficult path.
So when you think about some of the difficulties in the path, Lara, do you think some of the difficulties and the challenges that you had in the path, just in getting the schooling, prepared you in some way for what the actual career would look like when you started to practice?
You know what? Absolutely. So it kind of goes in with one of the discrepancies again is as a Caribbean student, you're commonly moving among different hospitals for your clerkship. And unfortunately, there is a stigma around Caribbean students in that you're inferior to a U.S. student. So when you're coming into the hospital, you are there with your A game on, you're out of your comfort zone. So you assume a role. You know, you come, it's like being an athlete, you come ready to play. So every time I entered the hospital, I was ready to play. But then that made me much more comfortable with who I was, comfortable with presenting myself. There was nothing besides giving 110%. But then, you know, you're casually pushing yourself every time you wake up in the morning. And then I was driven to be a stronger person and a stronger physician and apply my knowledge base a lot more each and every day. And to the point where it comes a little bit more naturally. So I felt that when I got into my career setting now, I had all of those skills with me. I don't think I would have gotten them going a more traditional route.
What do you think about that, Megan?
I think that's an interesting observation, and I think that's really, really good information for our listeners out there. Really, that difference between med schools of Canadian schools potentially being a little more difficult to get into, but a little more comfortable once you're in, versus going Caribbean and maybe getting in a little bit easier, but really facing a lot of challenges along the way. So Lara, can you tell us a little more what challenges did you face, or did your cohort face, that so many of them did not finish the program with you?
There's a couple of reasons. You know, one of the easiest things is to sort of touch on is that when you are, you know, you're in medicine, it is a grind. It takes a lot of, you know, devotion and willpower to sit and sort of engage in that information. But doing it out of the comforts of everything in life. You don't have your family, you don't have your friends, you're living in a foreign country, you're eating different food, you're living in a different climate. Not naturally having some of those pieces of safety to go home to or live around are definitely a large part of the challenge. And some people can rise above that and some people cannot. So that was a large portion of it, especially for me. I had a boyfriend at the time, but I didn't have kids. I didn't have a family. So, watching some of my friends leave their children to go study and, just dive into a career that they felt suited to, that must have been a lot more difficult for them. The other sort of difficult things would be, a lot of the time you're setting up a lot of your own clinical clerkship. So again, in a Canadian system, everything is much more well laid out for you. As a clinical clerk, you have to, as a Caribbean student, a lot of the time you're being the proactive one to set up your own rotations. And then you have to be very, very judicious about the way you do that, because some people require these interactions as a student to get jobs in the future. So, it's every day is almost like an interview, that same sort of, that on that same vein. So some people are trying to, make sure that they're in the city that they want to be in, and getting the right rotation at the right time isn't always doable. So it's really a lot of juggling your own schedule, reaching out to hospitals yourself, making an impression, because you're not granted anything. Everything that you get, you have to work for. So for example, I was in Baltimore for most of my clerkship, and they weren't taking students at that time during the surgery rotations, and surgery core rotations are a part of any medical student's clerkship. You need 3 months in a surgical rotation. I had to I went out to the chiefs and went out to the directors myself after being in a hospital that I liked for a certain amount of months. And I got my own position there and opened that up for our school in the future. So now our school freshly starts to rotate in surgery there as well. So, it's a lot of, you're being a lot more proactive and doing a lot more searching than you would otherwise. And doing that while studying is not easy. So that's a large portion of it.
It's interesting hearing you talk about your journey, because for those of you who tuned into our last episode where we were talking about the differences in the generations and millennials and some of the stereotypes about millennials, we hit on one of the stereotypes about millennials being lazy versus millennials being quite hardworking. And I think you, Lara, make an excellent example of how hardworking millennials can be, that you had to overcome all of those challenges and work really, really hard and deal with all of those stresses to get to where you got. So can you tell us a bit more about your journey once you got into Baltimore and how you progressed from there and actually moved into working in Canada?
Absolutely. So the largest component of my clerkship was in Baltimore, and mostly because, again, I had a few good rotations there and was able to sort of stick around at one hospital. From Baltimore, we had about 2 years worth of a clerkship, and at that time you go through a series of board exams. So to be in the U.S., you need to write United States medical licensing exam. There's a step 1. Once you pass step 2, there's a 2-part step 2 exam. So in order to apply as a resident anywhere, you need to have all of those 3 examinations done. So I did that. These are, we're talking like rigorous exams. These are soul-sucking exams. They, the first exam, we're talking a 9-hour multiple choice computer exam. So you see people crying in the bathrooms in the middle of these exams, just ready to snap. But, you get through it, and people have done it before us and people will do it after us. So as a U.S. student, so you do that, and then you can apply to be a resident. And a resident, I guess it could be defined as a physician with an MD training in their specialty of choice. So you're almost like a student physician. So you have your MD title, but you're still working towards a specialty. So you're still also, in a way, a student. I guess as a doctor, you're a lifelong student, but at that point, you're like a student physician. So from those 3 board exams, for me to want to come home, I wanted to come home to Canada from the get-go. That was, a top priority from the second that I left. So while preparing for those exams through my clerkship, I was also preparing for the Canadian ones. So Canadians have to write it's like a Canadian equivalent step 1 and 2 exam in order to apply to Canada. So I wrote double the board exams and applied to both Canada and the U.S. to be a resident. So in the match system, it sort of works out that if you are a student applying to both, you are exempt or disqualified from the U.S. match if you match in Canada. So when you're applying that way, the assumption is that Canada is a first choice. So upon obtaining my residency in Ottawa as a family resident, I was automatically removed from the U.S. match. So it's sort of like you get your top choice. We're not going to involve you in this next match anymore. But I did apply all throughout the U.S. as well.
So, Lara,
and I moved home. So.
A question for you then, Lara. So one thing we might have missed is the kind of specialty you took on. So are you an ER surgeon? Are you a surgeon with a particular specialization in surgery? What's the area that you're in? And also, where do you see yourself headed as time goes by?
Okay. So I applied for a residency in family medicine. So, they're also known as, you can be a family physician or a general practitioner or a GP. So I applied for that mostly because I liked everything. I liked kids, I liked adults, I liked geriatrics, and I love people. So I loved the fact that I could envision myself sitting in an office and forming a rapport and seeing, a family through the ages. I thought, life couldn't get better than that. Seeing an entire family, watching them grow old together and knowing not only their whole health history, but their own personal history. It's a pretty magical thing to have that. So, I thought if I could combine a love of medicine with a natural love of people, then, life would be perfect. So that's why I started off with family medicine. During my residency, my first year, I would have started 2014. So at the start of my residency, I had a rotation and emerge. And then the other sort of extremist side of me, I guess, realized that I loved acute care. I loved dealing with trauma cases. I loved dealing with, the life-threatening illnesses in addition to dealing with chronic disease and other sort of illnesses more that you would commonly see in a family practice setting. So it's kind of lovely in Canada because you can get a family medicine, emergency medicine residency where you do 2 years devoted to family medicine, and there's an extra year known as a fellowship year where you have a really sort of strong 1 year where you focus on emergency medicine. So I'm at the phase now where, as of November, I'm completed my 2 years in my family medicine residency training, and I'll be applying for that extra fellowship year so I can sort of satisfy the other desires in me to practice acute care. So eventually, I guess what that will play out for me for my ideal future would be a situation where I could work in a family health team, again, have my own patient roster, work in the clinic a few days a week, but then also have 2 days or so working in the emergency department a week.
I'm going to ask you one more question.
A really good balance.
I'm going to ask you one more question, then turn it over to my co-host. So the question is this. Okay. Now that you've worked in a tropical country, so I grew up in Trinidad, and St. Kitts is not too far away at all. So now that you've worked in a tropical country, and now that it's clear that you do have a little bit of an adrenaline junkie side to your DNA.
Do I ever?
Do you think that at some point in time you might do something like a stint with Doctors Without Borders or something like that?
Yeah, funny you mention that. It's like you know me already, but you don't. I actually spent a month in Nepal doing outreach work, and it was amazing. So it's a completely different view. It's a completely different culture. I went there as a fourth-year med student, and I was under the impression that I would be, working hands-on and really getting in there. But the amount of responsibility and the amount of sort of respect and duty that I was given as a med student was almost crazy. So, they took us to a very remote village, beautiful village called Sindal Palchuk. And it was myself, another med student at my level of training, and some aspiring students, I guess, from the States. So they weren't really in medicine. They were doing their science degrees, and they wanted medicine, and they wanted to help. So it was our little crew of people, and we got dropped off at the front of an old cement building, and the translator was telling me what this man was saying out loud, and he was saying, the doctors are here, and then people started lining up. So I'm, looking all around, like, okay, cool, where are they? I want to meet them too. No, it's us. So we ended up running a hospital for a day, and, by no means did I do anything that would have been unethical. I didn't perform any surgeries that day. However, we were giving checkups and appropriate antibiotics and medications to all age ranges and people who had never seen really a physician in their life, including, for women here, we have pelvic exams, or, better known as pap smears or things like that. We get them every 3 years as annual checks after the age of 21. There were women there who had never been checked in their life. So I'm essentially performing, the very first pelvic exam they ever had. And we're not speaking the same language here. So sort of relying on the translator to explain why I'm doing this sensitive exam and what's going on. And it was just a very surreal experience. And so to answer the question, absolutely. I will absolutely be doing outreach work. I can't wait to be in a position where I'm completely comfortable with my knowledge bank, and I can bring my own supplies and get affiliated with the right group and, head out there. There's a lot of places that are already on my radar.
Wow. So it sounds like you've had some really interesting and unique experiences that med students in Canada might not have the opportunity to get, or might have to work a little harder to get, because that's crazy and really, really interesting to hear. I'm going to switch gears on you a little bit, because I think a stereotype that a lot of people have about doctors is that they work really, really hard. The average person knows doctors have 12-hour shifts or 24-hour shifts. They're working all the time. So I'm really curious for you to share with everyone listening how you kind of stay grounded and how you find balance in your life, and even, I guess, just a little clarity on how busy your schedule is.
Very good question. It's true. And I would say it's not a completely clear-cut answer, because I would say a resident schedule, which is where I'm at right now, will probably different than that of a staff. And it also depends on the subspecialty you're in, because each subspecialty demands a different level of hours and different timing. So I guess a good way to think of it is, if I'm in a clinic setting, typical, I would probably work from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. during clinic hours, but you're also going to have evening clinic hours. And if you're involved in a hospitalist rotation, you could also have a 24 to 26-hour call shift where you have your pager on you, you're in hospital, you're answering everything from a minor call about a medication change to more life-threatening events like ruling out heart attack and stroke and, serious illness in your patients. So it can really vary. And then if you step into the world of a surgeon, they're starting their days much earlier than a family physician or an internist. They're there, at 5 a.m. rounding on their patients and preparing for their day. So, the schedule is very rigorous. And as a resident, this is when we're all hungry. We're supposed to be learning our most and squeezing in every bit we can. And the best experience tends to be on your night shifts when there's lots to do and a lot of it is on your shoulders. So, currently I'm in a rotation where we're doing internist work or internal medicine. And absolutely, you're going to be on call every fourth day where you are truly demanded of for 26 hours. And, that doesn't mean you can sneak away to the call room for a 5-hour sleep. You're up, you're on call. But then there's also very much more reasonable days where I'm in a clinic setting and I get to spend, 8 to 10 hours, in an outpatient setting. But it can be, I would be lying to you if I didn't say there weren't I call them the bathroom cries, the days when you sort of just need to have your own moment. You just have to break away. The pager is going off. You're exhausted. There's a lot on your shoulders, but you're trying to prove yourself and you're trying to learn. And sometimes you just got to have a good cry. But then you shake it off and you get back to it. And then after a call shift, reflecting on what you've learned and what you've done is truly gratifying. It's a privilege to do what you do, and you can lose sight of that, especially during those bathroom cries. But, it always comes full circle, and you always are reminded of why you're doing what you're doing.
Lara, I'll make a quick observation, and that is that everything that a person might conceivably complain about as either a failure or a major obstacle, you have managed to look at and recreate in your mind as an opportunity. So you applied late to get into a Canadian med school, and it doesn't work out. Well, that would be grounds for somebody plummeting into a depression, giving up, and yielding to the gale force winds of what they're experiencing. But you didn't do that. Instead, you sought an alternate route and tried to find your way into a kind of journey through a system that might not have had the same kind of upscale reputation that Canadian or American schools might have had. And you made that a major, major opportunity. And the very fact that in these schools, or in this system that you were in St. Kitts, you didn't have some of the luxurious preparations of your schedule, your networking, your opportunities, and so on for you, you learned to do it all for yourself. And you didn't complain about that once. You actually took it on as an opportunity that strengthened you and gave you the resilience and the ability to take the initiative yourself to develop your own career path. So we're hearing some really remarkable things in the story that you're telling us. You tell us your words, and then the story tells us another story itself. And that's what we're actually doing in this show, Lara. So I'm going to ask you a question then. What does a happy day, what does a really great day look like for you when you're in the workplace?
Number one, thank you for that perspective. I really appreciate all your words. And your question, what does a happy workday look like? I have two very different sort of visions come to mind. The adrenaline, skydiving, acute care junkie in me will say, a day where we have a resuscitation in an emergency department and the team works, a resuscitation, you really see the value of teamwork and closed loop communication. So it would be a day that there was a patient that came in very unwell, and through teamwork, closed loop communication, and sort of a cohesive way of doing things, we brought that patient out of it, and were able to, if not save, but stabilize a patient in a really dire situation. And then on top of that, be able to communicate to a worried family at the same time, sort of taking things from a medical and a human approach. So for me, a really happy day in an acute setting would look something like that. Another would be in a clinic setting. I've already formed some pretty strong relationships, I'd say, with the patients that I've seen over 2 years that, I've inherited as my own patients, and I'm sure that I'll see again in the future. And it would truly be seeing some of my long-term patients in clinic, whether it's for follow-ups of depression, schizophrenia, following up on their diabetes, doing well baby checks, but having a fully booked clinic with some of my favorite patients with a wide variety of things. So having a day of variety, from everything from mental health to chronic conditions, and sitting in my own desk with my own staff. That to me is a happy day. Variety, learning, teamwork, all the people you want that like you, and the people that I see every day bring me joy. And then, if you can see that someone walks out of the office in a better state than they were when they walked in, that's a good day.
That's great. That's great. So I have an interesting question for you, and one that we usually ask all of our guests, and one that we find really helpful for those people that are listening. I am wondering what you would go back and tell your 18-year-old self about your career today if you could. What advice would you give yourself, and what would you tell yourself?
That's a good question. You know what? One thing is I wouldn't change anything I would have done. So I would have told my 18-year-old self, keep following your gut. It's okay to take a risk. I would have probably said exactly that. I see what you're thinking, 18-year-old Lara. Go for it. Don't look back.
That's really interesting, because my next question was going to be if you had any regrets. But even if you don't have any regrets, would you do anything differently, or was there anything different that you would change about your career?
I definitely think that I'm in the right field. It's funny, looking back, I look at a lot of friends who had sort of set out the same goal of going to med school on a different route and getting back to their home country. And sadly, it doesn't always get to be that, happy Disney Cinderella story where you get what you set out for and you achieve your goals. Some people are still struggling to find a residency in countries that they don't even want to be in. Some people didn't aspire to stay in the States, and they're in the States and they're away from family. So, looking back, it was great that I had, positive blinders on, and my cup is half full sort of vibes took over and just said, you're going to get to where you want to get. But if that hadn't have happened, certainly looking back, I could have been more on my game, and I could have applied and gotten a registration number in a more timely way. But you know what? Where I was at in school and sort of the path I took, the people that I met, and the qualities that I gained by doing something, and I guess in a more unorthodox, difficult way, makes me feel more the person that I was meant to be today than anything. So I actually couldn't envision doing anything differently. Now, if I was going to go on a totally different vein and say, change my career path, I like theater and performance. So I could see myself completely going the opposite and going into dance, theater, and performance and just indulging in the arts. I don't see any in between.
So that is a very different field and a very different answer.
I know.
I see a big difference between theater and medicine. But I guess what makes those both or dance and medicine, what makes those both seem like they would be careers that would work for you? Or do you see similarities between medicine and dance or theater?
They are completely unrelated. But I would just say the only commonality between the two of them is they were two natural passions. I naturally loved to dance and perform, and I went head on into that growing up. And I naturally loved science, medicine, and people, so I went head on into that. You are absolutely right. There is no relation, and they couldn't be more opposite. But maybe it's more so the fact that I couldn't imagine not being in medicine. I couldn't imagine another career path for me that would be as suited.
Hang on a second,
Yeah.
both of you. Here's something that it might be pretty weird, but I think Meg's used to that with me right now. So this is an observation. They may actually be quite well related, Lara.
I saw that too, Dev.
Both of them
I confuse myself sometimes, so you clear this one up.
Both of them involve innovation and movement within tolerances and constraints. So when you're doing your dance, or when you're doing whatever you may be doing from the point of view of acting or whatever you're involved in the arts, you're dealing with the tolerances either of the human frame, what it's capable of doing within movement, and finding as much variation and variety as you can within that movement, and the constraints of the human physique, its joints, its the radius of motion for the different limbs, and so on and so forth. And there's limitless variation involved in that particular realm. When you're working in medicine, you're into the tissue, you're into the meat, into the bone, into the joints, into the systems, the complex
I love it.
systems. What you're doing, Lara, is something that is the equivalent of dance with the human anatomy and what it's actually made of, the physiological structure of the human frame from the inside, whereas dance is on the outside. Now, what do you think about that? Is that a kooky sort of comparison?
I wish you could see the smile on my face. that was impressive. How did that come to your mind like that? And then how did you place it so eloquently so that all of us could actually see exactly what you were talking about?
You need to listen to the show more often. Dev is a magician in that sort of way. And it's funny because
you are a wizard.
as you were talking, Lara, I had my own answer in terms of how medicine and dance are similar. And I feel like Dev's is much more interesting and metaphorical. The two observations that I would have made is that first of all, both medicine and dance are risk-taking endeavors. And I think you've touched a lot on the risk-taking and thrill-seeking element of your career. And I think when you dance or when you perform, you have an audience and you can be the star, or something really bad can happen, something can go wrong, and it's an utter failure. And I feel like both of those things could happen. So I feel like that risk-taking and that thrill-seeking is an element in medicine and in dance. The other thing that I would say is a similarity from my point of view is that element of preparation. And having no personal background in dance or theater, my understanding is for every dance, for every show, for every performance, you have to prepare and you have to build up that specific performance. And I think you had to do that with medicine too. You know, med school is obviously a long journey. You did 4 years of an undergrad, did 4 years of med school, and you're still now finishing up a 2-year residency. So you have had to prepare and prepare and prepare for this career journey as well. And I feel like those are both elements that overlap as well.
So you guys know me better than I know myself.
and as she was saying that, you know, the element of risk in both dance and in working in an OR or an emergency department with a person on the gurney, something could go horribly wrong that you just could not anticipate. And so that's the bungee cord moment, where in the moment you need to use your skills and training to completely improvise in that moment. It's the same thing with dance too, right? So I just think it's wonderful that there are these connections between dance and medicine and what you're actually doing and who you are and what you're all about.
Very well put. I guess medicine is an art too, right?
But we've got a tough question for you to sort of reflect on it at this early stage of your career, and that is this: you're at your retirement party, however many years into the future that is, and people are getting up to give speeches about Lara. What are the things which would touch you most deeply to hear them say about what your career was all about and what it was like to work with you?
So this would be something that my colleagues would say about me, about working with me?
Yes.
So things that I would want to hear from fellow colleagues who were forced to work with me day in and out. You know what? I would love for people to think that I was always a non-judgmental, accessible, open-minded person. I never want someone that I work with or work for or work under to think that they couldn't address something, or they couldn't be honest about something, or they couldn't approach me with an idea or a treatment that wasn't completely in keeping with my natural style. I would like to be known as a very rounded person. Okay. Someone who can appeal to anybody.
And that is a really interesting answer. And we always get different answers to that question. And that is not the answer that I would expect from a doctor.
What would you expect?
I don't know, but I wouldn't expect that. Kind of in that same vein, and I want you to talk yourself up a little more. I want to know, what are 3 key things that you want to accomplish between today and the day that you retire?
Ooh. And these are all career-related accomplishments.
Well, They can be career, they can be personal, but I think I'm more interested in the career ones.
Okay. So 3 things that I'd like to accomplish. So first off, my short-term goal will be getting through an emergency medicine fellowship year. That's phase 1. So that's definitely my short-term goal. My next goal would be being a part of a smaller family health team in the Toronto area. One where I have sort of colleagues that I can bounce ideas off of, work with daily, and we'll support each other. So that would be number 2. Let's see.
Are there any specific other accomplishments that you want to achieve between now and the time you retire?
I would love to get involved with academia. I love teaching. So you know what? I was a TA throughout med school, and I love giving PowerPoints. I love being, that's a performance thing, I guess, but I love being in front of a crowd. I love passing off knowledge. I love the idea of someone walking in a room and leaving the room with a new knowledge bank just based on me spending an hour with them. I would love to give some of my life experiences to students that I see. So certainly I think a big goal before retiring would be teaching.
Okay. So we're getting close to our break time. We may have just a few more questions for you between now and then. But I guess one thing that I wonder, and that some of the people tuning in today or listening to our podcast after today might wonder, is what advice you would give to people or Canadians or other millennials or people who are younger that want to become doctors. What advice would you give them moving forward?
Okay. So number 1, get involved. There has to be more to you than just a person who's good with textbooks. It's great to be really strong in your academics, but be a complete person with different outlets and different passions. So bring something unique to the table, whether that's performance arts, whether that's a different portion of your degree, whether that's volunteering, whatever it may be. Just have something that makes you and makes you a little bit more unique. Another thing would be always have a plan B. So I guess for me, when I applied, I had a plan B, C, and D. So, if I didn't get into Canada, I would have been in the United States. If I wasn't in one certain residency, I had 2 things that I was applying for. So I had another residency that I would love to be in as another plan for me. So, have more than just a plan A. Grades are an easy one. Obviously, you need good grades for med school. That goes without saying. A big part of me would be a risk taker. Nothing is for certain, I guess, when you're going a non-traditional route. Like, I think that if you're in a Canadian medical school, things will go seamlessly, and there are templates and expectations, and things will go off smoothly. But if you know what you want and you are okay with a plan B and C, take a risk. You can also go abroad. You can go to the United States. You can go to Ireland. You can go to the Caribbean. Be aware of the challenges you'll face and just go in head on. Talk to people. Spend some time with other physicians, perhaps in the specialty you want or perhaps in others, whether that's shadowing or whether that's sitting down with a loved one or a friend. Speak to someone in the path that you're aspiring to take on. Get their perspective on it, and get that from more than just one person again, because we're all very different and we'll have a different viewpoint. But speak to someone who's gone through it and in different phases. Speak to the older physician. Speak to the resident. Speak to the student. That's some of the key ones for me. I could go on.
That is beautiful, especially to hear you talk about, sort of engaging people in, I suppose, virtual mentoring, as well as just a mutual sort of group of feedback individuals. So that That is really, really wonderful. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. You've taught us a lot. We've learned a lot from you. And I think what you've done is you've established a kind of an example for other people to follow in the footsteps of, especially with regards to managing and finding opportunities within potentially disappointing circumstances. That's something that's tremendously valuable for the people that have listened to you. So thank you very, very much for being on the show with us today, Lara.
Dev, Meg, thank you so much for having me. Total privilege. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Lara. It was great to have you. And with that, we will go to our break and we will move into the second part of our show today. Okay, and with that, we are back and we move into the portion of today's show where Dev and I are both going to reflect on themes and elements and interesting points that came out from our interview with Lara today. The first thing I guess that I would touch on is just really that I feel like the title of our show today is really perfect for Lara's career, Making Medicine Work. I think that's great because I really think that's what Lara did in her journey as she explained to us, some of the challenges she had to face, even from the time of getting into med school. She mentioned that from a young age, she always wanted to help people. She always had a dream to go into medicine, even though dance was something very much that was a passion for her as well as medicine. So I think that's really interesting. I think my thoughts and my key takeaways from what Lara spoke about today was really that element of risk taking and following your passion. And I think she worked hard, she took risks, and she made her career and her journey work for her. I think it's also an interesting element and a bit of dichotomy there that she also was a calculated risk taker. So she mentioned that she had a plan A and she had a plan B, C, and D also. So even though she followed her gut, she followed her passion, she also had backup plans. So if something didn't work out, she had an alternate course of action. So I think that's a really good lesson and a really key takeaway for those of you considering pursuing a career in medicine or really any career in general. I really think another element that stood out and was really, really nice to hear from Lara's story is that holistic picture that it's not just about grades and it's not just about medicine and only pursuing that. She has that element of dance and volunteering and risk-taking within her career and within her life. And also the fact that even though she is a risk-taker, stability is in there too. So she mentioned the fact that she loves those growing relationships with families and having the ability to have long-term relationships and see a family grow over time. So I see that as a bit of a balancing out to that risk-taking adrenaline rush that she mentioned. So I think that natural passion, the adrenaline rush, dealing with people and her love of people and long-term relationships. I think really that balance of all of those things is a really key element in Lara's journey. I think at this point, what I'll do is pass it over to Dev because I'm curious to hear what he took from Lara's story and what highlights he would kind of pull out from everything she talked about today.
Thank you very much, Meg. Well, what can we say? You have all kinds of guests in a show like this, and some of them you really have a terrific and almost instantaneous sense of connection and resonance with. And Lara was one of those. I think one of the things that really sticks out for me and will be useful for everyone to pay attention to is the way that she disrupts and breaks up and really destroys a lot of the stereotypical notions that people have out there regarding millennials. Like Meg, She's an individual who's exceptionally hardworking, resilient, and dedicated, but at the same time loves other aspects of life outside of her formal work that she does. She demonstrated an incredible capacity for managing disappointment. Now, as I mentioned during the show, people who had received as many obstacles as she had, for people who might be standard, usual students applying to get into med school, she took every one of those disappointments and she made an opportunity by going down into St. Kitts. Yes, she wasn't going to Harvard. She might not have been going to McMaster University in Hamilton in Ontario, Canada. She might not have been going to the University of Toronto, but she was going to a university with a smaller and international group of people of many different age groups, some of whom had kids and families, and she had to work harder, but at the same time had many of the facilities to make use of that med students would have here in Ontario or anywhere in the United States or Europe, for example. What she lacked was that pre-booked and sort of pre-packaged set of connections, opportunities, and networking sort of nodes and pathways that would be prepared in advance for a med school student here in North America. Now, that could have been an entire drag for her, and that too could have knocked her completely off, because to do those things at the same time as you're working full-time and studying as a student is exceedingly difficult, but it is possible. What Lara demonstrated is there are vast reserves in us as human beings above and beyond what our standard frame of tiredness and exhaustion might make us feel, which if we go that extra mile can actually lead to incredible vistas of opportunity, of growth, and of development. And what our colleague has described of herself in this show is an individual who is up for any challenge that life could possibly put in her way, as far as career is concerned, and more than likely in her personal life too, likewise. What else did we see that we would sort of pull out as a major point? Well, Meg put it beautifully when she talked about the risk-taking element. There is an interest in dangerous brinksmanship, getting right to the edge, pulling people back from the brink of death. That is an element of Lara's personality. I imagine on the one side, in certain circumstances of life, it can be something that is almost a thing she has to be careful to control so that it doesn't get out of control. But with respect to her career, it's actually something that's an incredible gift because she is not afraid of danger. She actually embraces it and runs into it and works within the constraints of difficult and hugely challenging circumstances in order to drive through to some kind of a resolution, to bring someone back to the dead, to stabilize a patient. And then that other component, which, is, I have to say, not all that common amongst docs, is the interpersonal element. She did indicate that aspect of dealing with the families and restoring calm to the families is another important aspect. I worked a number of years in the healthcare system, in the cancer control system, both at a federal and a provincial level in Canada. And I can tell you, many doctors are wonderful when it comes to meat, bone, gristle, tissue, and organs. But don't ask them a question or interact with them as a human being, because they haven't got any patience for that. Well, Lara's also breaking some stereotypes as a clinician in that particular regard too, likewise. So she's not going to be somebody who's going to be able to be easily pinned down and defined, and that's just wonderful. She's going to be entirely unique, and who she is will emerge and flower more and more as time goes by. She's hardworking. She's an extremely resilient individual. She's learned to do a lot for herself in her life. And I imagine this is not just something that she's learned in St. Kitts and in her education. From what she described and reading between the lines, It's something she learned as a child, to be able to do a lot in the way of finding opportunities to come through difficult circumstances, to work with the illness and the challenges in her family life, so that ultimately something good could come of it all. When I look at this young woman's career, to me, what I can anticipate is a rich and a profoundly helpful and useful engagement with whatever she is involved with throughout her career moving forward. I think more than anything else, what sticks out for me in Lara's description of herself, without her ever intending for that to be the case, is an incredibly generous, giving, and helpful, sharing kind of individual. She wants to teach. Yes, she loves performance. There's something in the realm of self-expression, of getting out of herself and proving and demonstrating herself and her capacity in everything that she does, from dance to surgery, from acute care to family medicine, as a GP, whatever it is. There's something that involves communications, analysis, touching the depths of what people go through and finding ways to alleviate the pain and the stress, or to bring joy and pleasure to the individuals involved as it relates to that dance component. She is a dancer. She's dancing as she does her work as a physician and a clinician. But I reckon, looking and listening to what we've heard in this hour with her, she's a dancer with life, and takes on all of its richness, all of the darkness, all of the light, all of the opportunities to move within it in such a way as to derive from life and all of its inherent difficulties the beauty and the grace that is available to every one of us when our careers begin to flower and who we are and what we are is fully expressed in what we do for a living. It's been a real pleasure and a real privilege to listen to our guest and to learn from her in this session today. I'm Dev Ramcharan, and I'll turn it over to my co-host to say goodbye to you.
Wow, Dev, that was beautiful. You just ran with that one, and I think everything you hit on and everything you touched on was so true. Just for the listeners out there, I have actually known Lara for a number of years, actually almost about 10 years. So your reading between the lines was really on point. So that's great powers of observation there. So with that, we will end today's episode of Career Cravings. Like Dev said, thanks so much to Lara for being a guest on our show today. And for everyone out there listening, we hope you have a great week, and we hope you can take what you learned today and apply it to your career. Follow your passion, be a risk taker, be kind and compassionate to other people. And with that, we will see you next Sunday on Career Cravings.
The career discussion doesn't stop here. For more information about how to transform your career, visit CanadaCareerCounseling.com. And remember to tune in next Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Bold Radio Station for the next episode of Career Cravings.